I would recommend we do not try this.
Well, you're the one who said we needed a plan.
This is not a very good plan.
That remains to be seen. Oh, hey there. Welcome to the Nerdy Photographer Podcast. I'm your host, Casey Fatchett. If you haven't listened to the podcast before, in addition to sharing entertaining and informative photography and business-related content, I also do some nerdy sci-fi stuff with the crew of the Starship Fibonacci. Right now, we're debating my plan of flying through a wormhole to cut some time off our next trip.
Not a good plan.
Agree to disagree there, Fib. Speaking of plans, on this episode of the podcast, marketing expert Beth Taubner has returned to talk to us again, and this time it's about putting together a plan for marketing your photography business. It's a great conversation, so be sure to stay tuned for that right after the break. You know, while you're here, you should also be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this show with your friends, or even your enemies. Who knows, they may like it. So, Fib, what are the odds we don't make it through? Never mind. Never tell me the odds. Hello there, Nerdy Photographer listeners. Do you have a website or do you need one? Well, let me tell you, you should be using SiteGround to host your website. I used different hosts for many, many years, and I dealt with so many problems. Terrible support, slow loading speeds, all sorts of attacks on my site that I couldn't deal with. But when I switched to SiteGround, my problems have gone away. I haven't had to worry about my site once in the 5 years that I've been using SiteGround. And right now you can get 80% off hosting and a free transfer of your website. Hosting can start from as low as $2.99 a month. $2.99 a month. That's so cheap. And it's so good. I wouldn't recommend it to you if I didn't use it myself. Head over to nerdyphotographer.com/recommends/SiteGround. That's nerdyphotographer.com/recommends/SiteGround. Or you can click on the link in the episode notes and get over there. 80% off hosting and a free transfer. You're not going to regret it. Hello and welcome to the Nerdy Photographer Podcast. I'm your host, Casey Fatchett. And on this episode, we're back with Beth Taubner, who's a branding and marketing expert who's been on the show before. Beth, thanks for coming back.
Hi, great to see you all, see you through the ether. I'm very excited to be here again because in our first session, which was a long session for those of you who listened to it, we got so excited talking in depth about what it means to be a brand and to give you all some tools to work on your own brand. And today we're going to be going the next step along to talk about what I call language for visual people, because I find that visual people are frequently not word people. And I want to help you all with that because I think it's a really important tool for you to be able to deploy in finding yourself, finding the heart of your work and in finding the right clients that are in alignment with you.
It can definitely be hard for creatives in all sorts of ways to, if you're a visual person, but also just like it's hard to, I think sometimes for people to kind of crystallize those thoughts, when it comes to like the business side of things, as opposed to just being the creative person.
Well, the thing is that language is a creative tool. And I think that I have found over the course of all the work that I've done, when I did a lot of commissioning, sometimes I found that the greatest photographers that I worked with were almost mute. Like, in other words, they just couldn't speak. They would just clam up. I'm going to get into the details of what all the issues are and what some of the solutions are.
Well, before we start, to give people a kind of a reintroduction, what's something about you? We talked a lot before, but we want to know something about you that maybe people don't know.
Well, I thought what I would share with you is something about being an entrepreneur, because I'm an entrepreneur just as everyone in the audience is, and as you are, Casey. So I went to Morocco on a holiday with my cousin, and we completely fell in love. And I came back to New York, and with my graphic designer, we designed a whole line of home goods. And then I went back to Morocco 3 months later, and then I lived and worked there on and off for 3 years. And we developed this line called Semi-Precious, NYC. And I worked with commissioned work from artisans. We worked with beautiful vegetable dyes. We made napkin rings and rugs, like little cool, very modernist rugs. And we made argan oil soap kind of ahead of the curve, which was really interesting because people didn't understand it at the time, but it was all picked by hand by women collectives of women in one part of Morocco. And then 3 years later, Kiehl's developed an argan line. So it was a really amazing experience for me. And to sum it up, I would say when I arrived in Morocco, I spoke very rudimentary French from what I learned from Mademoiselle Cani when I was in 7th grade. I was not a good student. But by the time I left, I was able to understand a joke in French, which was unbelievable. And I started to dream in French. So that was pretty sexy.
That's the thing. Like what they always say, like when you're thinking in another language, that's when you're truly becoming fluent, because it's just it's naturally there in your mind.
Well, now the other language for me is the technical language. If only it would work so smoothly for me.
But language is really powerful, and that's like what we're going to talk about today a lot. Like, but that's before we get into too much of the marketing aspect of it. But like, let's like review a little bit about what we talked before about what it means to be a brand, because people might not.
What does it mean to be a brand? Now, well, here's kind of where I was planning to start today, where I'm saying, photographers can find it difficult to put their images into words. Coming from the position that one picture is worth 1,000 words, they're frequently unable to describe their work or who they are, no matter what the context may be. This I know from experience, because when I do portfolio reviews, I always ask the artist to start by talking to me about their work, which means what I'm asking them to do is to speak to me about their brand. So that's just one perfect example. So you might find that the first time people touch your work is frequently not through Instagram or through your website. You might be at a cocktail party, or you're at a picnic at your friend's house, and someone says, what do you do? And what they're really asking you is, who are you? So a lot of times we all freeze up and our mind goes blank, and we can feel really, really awkward because we feel put on the spot because we're completely unprepared. But it's not that we're unprepared with the marketing language. We're unprepared because we don't understand what our brand is. So that is something that I want to address first.
I think that's something that, like, I know from personal experience, people will commonly ask me, like, oh, what is it? What do you do? What, oh, you're a photographer. Like, what do you do? And I used to say, oh, I'm a wedding photographer, because that's mostly what I did, but I did other things. But it wasn't until I came to the realization that what I do is capturing really authentic and emotional photos, whether it's at a wedding or whether it's portraits of people. I'm trying to, like, I want to get who those people really are without like imposing like poses on them. I think that became the language with which I described who I am and what I do. Became, instead of just saying like, oh, I'm a wedding photographer, and just sort of like shutting down after that, it was more about like, I'm really about authenticity and like capturing that reality, as opposed to
I want to address something that you just said, because the language, I would want you to dot that language up more. So let's come back to that. You use the word emotional, authentic, and you like the word unique, which is a taboo word in the branding world.
Oh, I don't. When I ever say unique, it's like trying to bring out someone's unique personality, like bring them out, as opposed to putting
your
something
unique personality, which is you definitely have, and I say that with a big smile. So, what is a brand? Well, let's back up and lay the foundation for what a brand is. A brand is the way an audience experiences and perceives a company, product, or service, or individual, right? So, the first place we're talking about is perception. And for the audience, perception is fact. They don't know what the truth actually is. So we know that. We could just look at the politics of the time that we're living in.
Absolutely.
And then in addition, it's how you relate to your audiences. So it's relationship. So it's experience, it's perception, it's relationship. And then it's your reputation and aspirations. So that's really important because all of us are being talked about. Even if we think we're not, people are saying, well, that was a great experience. You might want to have that experience. Or they're saying that person was really sloppy, or I didn't like the way they retouched my pictures.
I think that's a big thing, especially for photographers, and depending on your, like, whatever part of, like, niche of photography you're in, whether it's weddings, if you're a wedding photographer, like, word of mouth spreads really quickly, and that's, for many people that's a huge part of their business is your reputation. But also, even if you're, say, I also deal in other parts of the photography world, do like corporate stuff, whatever, but like your reputation gets around very quickly. If you're someone who, like another business is going to hire you, people in certain businesses, they all hang out and talk to one another, and they move from one company to another. So like the word spreads, and like somebody says like, oh, I'm going to hire, so-and-so to do our photos. And somebody's like, oh, no. I had a really bad experience with them. Don't use them. Like those.
Well, this goes across the board, no matter what business you're in, because I was talking to my accountant and he said, well, everything in the accountancy world is done by reference because people are dealing with your money.
Right.
And I know that when I needed a new bookkeeper who I looked for a long time, I wanted someone who had a personal relationship with someone that I have a personal relationship with.
Someone you can trust.
Exactly.
That's
trust is implicit in that. So that's a really good point because that is not a unique attribute in that business because it's a given in that business.
Right.
So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. So lastly, we've talked about experience, perception, relationship, reputation. And then at the bottom of my list is what you make or do. So that's always a shock to people when I'm giving a talk because photographers, because there's a technical aspect to the work, they always lead with the make or do. And that is not engaging for the audience. So this is all the things that a brand is comprised of. Not one of these things. It's like a circular element around all of these traits.
Yeah, it's one of those things that we commonly discuss. Is like people say like, how come so and so is not a very good photographer? Like the pictures aren't that good, but they're so successful. It's like, well, they're very good at communicating their brand and marketing, whatever. It's like it's not entirely always about like the quality necessarily of the picture. And I talked to one friend recently who does a lot of corporate work, who said for their clients, it's not always about the best photo. It's the person they can rely on, and it's the person that they know that is going to provides that level of trust, is not going to, post pictures from a private event for their company or whatever, that they've learned to, when they're going to deliver the images. It's not necessarily just the quality of the pictures, but like what they're receiving.
The experiences, that's right.
Yep.
So you're addressing the experiential attribute. And I think that that's really important. So because many entrepreneurial businesses are very engaged in building based on references. And when you're building based on references, you still have to have a clear idea of what your brand is, because the person who's referring you has to be able to say, well, Casey is X, Y, and Z. Or, I've worked with Beth and her work is deeply transformational and it's very intimate. And she made me feel safe and it was extremely confidential. And I learned things about myself that I never would have known and that I'm able to now build into all aspects of my work. That's the brand definition experience. That's what we're saying very clearly. And so I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. So I just want to stress that when we're talking about a brand, we're not talking simply about what you make or do or your logo, because where I also work in the UK sometimes. And when we're talking about a brand redo, if I'm talking to a photographer, they say, well, I just redesigned my website and I got a new logo. So I've rebranded. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You haven't rebranded. You have used the tools of your brand to change the communication of your brand. Maybe you're, or maybe not, but maybe it looks different, but it has to feel the same. Because even when you're iterating visually, you still are going to have the same brand attributes. So what's an attribute? Like we always get into this conversation. An attribute is a trait, and a way for you to understand what a trait is, because attributes, when I got into the brand world and I started working for like future brands and companies like that, I'm like, what the hell is an attribute? Who uses that word on a regular basis? Now people use it more widely than they did when I got into the business. So if you think of it as a trait and you want to clarify with yourself, the exercise you put yourself through is you describe your best friend to yourself. So if I describe my best friend, she's fierce. She is a complete advocate for the people she loves. She thinks they're the best people in the world. So she's the person you want on your team. And she makes everyone around her extremely funny because she's so appreciative of humor. Like she watches Seinfeld every single night before she goes to bed. And her husband's like, why are you still watching it? Because you could have written those episodes. And she's like, because it makes me laugh. Right. So that you get a picture of her. So she's fierce, she's loyal, and she really, really appreciates humor. When we were younger, I could make her fall on the floor laughing. So that made me funnier and that made me feel good about myself. So that's not like a flat description.
Right.
Right. It feels juicy. So that's what we want.
It has more meat on the bone, per se. Like
so to speak, for those of us who are not vegan.
Yes. It is a turn of phrase. There is more substance to it.
That's right. You want to be known for the combination of elements that comprise your point of view or brand. So remember, for you visual people, your brand is your point of view. It's what makes you and your work you. So when we start working with someone and we're doing our discovery work, generally speaking, the people who come to us are not working with a group of attributes. They're not working with a group of traits. They're very hung up in the technical part where they want to talk about their equipment and what camera they're using and their lighting setup and why their lighting is so great. And that is not a distinctive attribute in your business because that is a given. So it's what we call like it's an entry level attribute. If you don't have it, you can't be in the business. So what we're looking to do is to do this deep discovery work that brings your background, your family background, the DNA of your family and your DNA, your psychological DNA that allows us to get our arms around what's distinctive in your attributes. And then that becomes the blueprint for everything from how you run your business to how you think about your images and what images you're creating and who you want to be in business with, whether it's the team you're working with to build your own brand and communicate your brand, like which I do with my clients, or if what you're doing is understanding the client's brand, and then you can understand how your brand and their brand fit together or not. So I hope that that's clear, because one important aspect of it is that it gives you a lot more power in the marketplace because you are looking for companies or clients that share your attributes. And then it's a good fit. Then you're not going to think, well, what a nightmare that shoot was.
Right. Yeah. Especially if you're dealing with like other companies, maybe you're finding whoever your client is, whether it's individuals or a company or whatever, like if you find people you're aligning with on those attributes, it makes the everything run much smoother because you're an extension. You're extending one another.
Because you're crossing over in a place that makes sense, right? So, you know, I always say that the brand is a mixture of capabilities. So that's the what you do. That's the part the photographers love. So if we're talking about Mac, for example, Mac is a computer. And as a company, one thing Apple does is make computers. But how do they do it? It's well designed, they're intuitive, and as a company, they've been visionary, right? So everybody's running along behind them.
Right.
And that a brand is always comprised of capabilities and attributes, but the capabilities are what are called rational. They're not emotional. I say that they're like the platform that allows these emotional traits to be defined and then be deployed. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And to kind of go back just slightly to something you were mentioning, like people, photographers generally bring like, oh, my lighting or my equipment, or whatever. I've seen that. I don't, you're going to lose clients like by like saying like, oh, well, I've got this great camera and I've got this, that's why, you should hire me, because then all you're saying is anybody who has this camera is, on the same level as you, and you're not distinguishing yourself whatsoever from other photographers.
Joe or Sammy or Susie. That's right.
Yeah. Like anybody who can manage to pay for that camera is on the same level as you. That's all you're saying there.
What's interesting about that is that in recent years, I've noticed that many, many, many of the people who come to me are always putting if they're doing a portrait, the person is always right in the middle of the frame, or even if they're doing a lifestyle picture. And I'm very opposed to that, because this probably has nothing to do with their attributes. It's something functional in the camera. And then they laugh and excuse it by saying, oh, well, but that's where the focusing mechanism is on this camera. And I'm like, if you don't have the ability to think that through, then you're going to be looking and feeling like everyone else. And we have to really break down that habit. It's a habit. It's a bad habit. And it's something that I would want the audience to think about, because if you're going to put the subject in the middle of the frame, have a reason for putting them there. Someone like Platon, like I just saw a picture he did, which I knew it was his before I even read the byline in the New Yorker, because there was the subject in the middle of the frame. The image was processed in a very specific way, and then his attributes came in, as did hers, because he is very groundbreaking, and he always has been. And the subject is very groundbreaking, and she's really important in kind of left-wing political circles. Anyway, I know we're going to say, oh my goodness, it's 2 hours. So I would say it's essential to focus on this combination of facts and feelings, because first of all, it's a call to action internally for you, the artists, right? You coalesce around this definition of the rational attribute, right? That functional, technical, perhaps attribute, or maybe you're really very seamless in how you're doing your billing and running your studio or something like that. And then the emotional attributes that sit on top of that, which we build a brand pyramid, and they're the one you know well, which I call your favorite pair of jeans. The one above that, which is 50-50. Sometimes you use it and sometimes you don't. And then the attribute at the top of the pyramid, which is normally hidden from view when we start the excavation work, but that becomes the brand driver that moves you forward to claim that attribute. And when you do that, you become much richer in your visual expression, and then leading to your language, of course, but who you are as a brand and what you're able to accomplish, and feeling much happier in the work that you're doing, which I feel is a big bonus. And then it can really make a difference in your income, because what you're doing is making sense to you and to the people that you're engaging with out in the marketplace.
If they can understand you, they're more likely to hire you.
And it's bound to be a better experience for everyone. So when you're working from a brand perspective, it's what elevates you and your work. So that leads to much more profound engagement and a much deeper relationship with the audience. So I think we've set the stage.
I think you have. And then we'll talk more about like the how to use our words, to help.
For those of you who are 5 years old, use your words.
And plenty of people who are, older than that who need to learn to use their words. How to use language and our words to create a better engagement from our brand.
So when the client is asking what you do, I may have said this already, they are asking who you are. What they're asking is, why should I be interested in you? Why should I spend my money on you? Why should I spend the weekend with you? When I was doing a ton of assigning for many, many years, and I would say each month, I can only have one artist that takes a lot out of me. If I was working with someone who is really like a prima donna, I could not have anybody else that month. If I was assigning 20 or 30 projects, everyone else had to be really easygoing. And so I knew that that was an attribute that this particular person had, but it was worth it because of the outcome. So I think it's really important to know, to go back to what I talked about the experience, the relationship, and so on. And at the same time, why should I be interested? Why was I interested in him? Because he was the best of the best as a celebrity photographer. There was no one better or smarter around at that time. So we want your peak attributes, these really dialed up brand expressions, to come into play. And as we're talking about today, language is a primary and often overlooked tool in expressing and controlling what differentiates you and your work.
Because you want to be different. I think that's I think that a lot of people go like, well, it's me, so I'm the different part of it, and that's what I do differently. Like they don't know how to express what it is that's different about themselves as a visual artist, and say like, and that's why we're getting into this. But I think that there's just at some level, I think that the people who think that they understand this and they go like, well, I'm the brand, it's just me, and I'm what makes it different because there's no one else like me, but they don't know how to actually express that.
They don't know how to define it.
Right.
Then they don't know how to express this, and they don't know how to use their tools, because very frequently visual people are not language people. I will get to this later on, but working with a team may be very important. Like I do a lot of writing for my clients, whether they're photographers or filmmakers or, they're agents or literary agencies, artist representatives, because that's not necessarily their gift. But then they take the writing, which always involves attributes and capabilities, and then they use that also as sales materials. So everything is part of the jigsaw puzzle. It's not one thing, because you're going to develop a group of tools. And I have the touch points just written out here. And I'm going to read this little list to you if you want to take notes, podcast listeners, and then I'm going to dissect them for you. So first of all, you need an elevator pitch. And I used to say, I'd go to an opening, let's say of ASMP in New York or something like that. And I would say to different photographers, well, what do you do? Or what's your work about? And they would say, I'm a still life photographer. So this is person A. Person B would say, I'm a still life photographer. Person C would say, I'm a still life photographer. So I'm thinking, why are any of you of any interest to me? Because I
Exactly.
have no picture of, like if you said to me, my work is very streamlined and extremely romantic and humorous, and I mostly shoot on location in places that look and feel like that, I would say, wow, that sounds really sexy to me. How I'd like to see that person's work. So this is where your elevator pitch comes in, and we'll talk more about that. Then we've started to talk about capabilities and attributes, because you have to build that into your tools. Getting your emails right. getting your message across in an email, using your bio as a brand tool, which is a really, really favorite tool of mine because I will let you in on a secret, which is that most people who have a job to give will read your about page before they do anything else. And if they like your picture, and if they feel that your bio is engaging and they connect to it, then they're going to travel through other parts of your site. So your bio, which I'm going to talk about, is both something you're going to use on your website, but you also need a bio for Instagram, for example, that is also a call to action, something visual. And then picking your platforms, your short bio for Instagram, thinking, is Instagram enough? Then there's Facebook and TikTok, of course, using your website more effectively. And then other kinds of marketing tools, like maybe you're doing a direct mail piece, maybe you're doing a quarterly newsletter. Like, as I say, I love newsletters. I think they're really juicy. Let's see what else I have here. Doing an email newsletter with gifts, stills, strong headline for your gift, different related. Well, it's what we've always called in the marketing business integrated marketing, and now they're called threads. But it's the same thing. It's just a different language for talking about integrated marketing. And integrated marketing is using different tools that are related but not identical.
Yeah,
so if you can work out your language, you're going to build upon your core language. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's something that people need to understand, like that you don't just do the same thing on every platform. You don't just like, I'm going to copy and paste this to, I'm using this on Instagram, and it's going to be the same thing on Facebook. It's going to be the same thing I post to TikTok. It's going to be the same thing I post to Threads. It's got to have, there has to be some differentiation. I think
but related.
Right.
So
hey there, listeners. Have you ever tried Audible? You might be thinking to yourself that it's just audiobooks, but it's so much more. It includes things like sleep tracks, meditation programs, podcasts like the one you're listening to right now. You like listening to stuff, right? And much, much more. I've had a lot of people tell me that I should get into narrating audiobooks. Maybe I'll give it a shot. Whether I do or not, you can get a free 30-day trial to Audible Premium Plus, or 3 months if you are an Amazon Prime member, if you head to nerdyphotographer.com/recommends/audible. Get access to Audible's entire catalog of bestsellers and new releases. What are you waiting for? Click in the episode notes and hit that link and start your free trial today.
I wanted to talk a little bit about brand slogans, which are frequently used everywhere, but they're not generally used on their own.
Right.
So something that we take for granted now is Nike. And when Nike was starting, they had their logo, which they used everywhere, and their brand call to action, which is just do it. And I could do an entire case study for you on the evolution of the Nike communications. But I'm talking about it because it's so simple, and you can get your elevator pitch to have the same kind of targeted simplicity as this kind of slogan. So when Kellogg's, like from, I don't know when they started this snap, crackle, and pop, but you understood that that was not Quaker oatmeal.
Right.
You understand that's not granola, right, which I prefer to eat. But the snap, crackle, and pop, you can hear it. It's oral, not oral, O-R-A-L, or oral, A-U-R-A-L.
It tells you what the experience is going to be.
Exactly. Oh, see, you're so smart. That's right. It's totally experiential. It moves you, right? And so this, of course, they probably spent $150,000 or more to have someone write snap, crackle, and pop for them. But it worked.
I think it was back in it might be the 60s.
I was going to say, I thought it was the 60s. Or we have De Beers, A Diamond is Forever. That has been used in commercials and print ads and direct marketing pieces. And if you were someone who was commissioned to do a project for De Beers, you would be using that as a jumping off point. And why were they picking you? Because maybe your attributes are very classic. Maybe you've done a huge project about couples. Like I had a client who did a long project with couples who had been married for 40 or 50 years and what they each loved about the relationship. And she did that project over the course of years around Valentine's Day. So you could see that with that kind of personal project, and there was humor and romance and love and generosity in her interviews with them, that she would be perfect for De Beers. That's how the brand attributes come together in the right project. I thought BMW is an interesting one because it's the ultimate driving machine. Is that what Volkswagen says? No. Is that what Chevrolet says? No. So I'm just giving you guys and gals and other people ways of looking at how powerful language can be.
And I think that there's an element of these, like especially with these, like we tend to, in some ways, I think, kind of mentally gloss over how important those are.
That's right.
Because it has become so ingrained in us, in the messaging from this brand. Like, for example, like, just do it. Like, yeah, we were just sort of like, but we don't consciously anymore sit there and think about, like, what does this really mean? Or like BMW, the ultimate driving machine. Like, there's so much going on in those 4 words. It's telling you, like, it's like the engineering is impeccable. Like, this is the experience is going to be amazing. Like, all of these things that are sort of just built into that phrase that we just sort of, we hear it and we go like, oh yeah, BMW. And
they're using the word ultimate.
Yeah.
They're not saying the best driving machine. They're saying the ultimate. They're saying no one surpasses us. But that takes us to, of course, other brand issues, which is that it has to be credible.
Right.
Like they were saying that, and they were just like a little pokey Kia.
Right.
That would be absurd. But because they're delivering on the brand, then you buy into it. So I thought I would take one little minute to talk about Jack Daniel's, because this is such a language-focused brand. So, and I remember a few years ago when I was in London, and they had Jack Daniel's posters all over the tube, so all over the subway there. And people would stay to read the posters and not get on their train. And that's how powerful it was. So when they say Mr. Jack Daniel was no saint, but he did start something of a religion, you get it. You understand. Mr. Jack Daniel passed away due to an injury he sustained when kicking his safe early one morning at work. Moral of the story, never go to work early. It's very folksy. I say it's like a yarn.
Yeah.
You get that.
It has that feeling to it.
It's from the good old days. It's always tied to the founding myth of Jack and the kind of man he was. It's highly individualistic. It's engaging. It's engaging with an audience that sees themselves as individualistic. It has a sense of place. Like, it's very Southern. Like, if you go to the Deep South, you're still going to understand where this brand comes from. And weirdly, I also had the client, one of my clients was the person who was the copywriter for this brand. So I do have a pretty intimate understanding of the brand. So let's move on to some of our tools. Most photographers, I find, tend to have fact-based bios that are based in non-differentiated attributes and skills. So they tend to write a bio that's about their problem-solving abilities, which is not distinctive because without that, you can't be in the business. And I was talking to someone lately who wanted to talk to me about their gear and how they organize their bag of gear. So I wanted to slit throat, right? That is not, nobody cares about that but you and your first assistant, because they have to put your bag back together. So they're going to be really happy about that.
Or other photographers. And that's a whole other thing that, we could probably get into in an episode is photographers taking pictures or content they're putting out there, which is solely for other photographers. It's not for people who are going to hire you. They're trying like to win some sort of popularity contest with other photographers or get other photographers' interest. And they're not the
Or
people
they're
who are,
not, I'm sorry, but they're not even addressing the issues that we framed in the earlier part of our conversation.
right.
They're not thinking about their emotional attributes or even their rational attributes. They're just thinking about the technical stuff. And so it's very, very difficult to build your brand. Like someone like Art Streiber does talk to you about his lighting setup, but it's always within the context of his gifts as an artist and his incredible ability to bring a group of people together and make sense in terms of the subject, make sense of what that collective experience is for those people in those images. That's one thing he is great at. So that's why he's hired all the time to shoot groups, because he understands the relationship between the people in the image, in the group, and then it allows him to attract other people who are interested in shooting or expressing a group dynamic.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's that I use these technical skills, but they're sort of like, they're not the main focus.
Exactly.
I'm doing like, this is what I do. And I use my technical skills to capture this sort of thing and to make it easier to capture these sorts of images. I think that what a lot of photographers tend to get bogged down in when it comes to gear is they're like, I saw recently someone like posting a reel on Instagram was about like, this is why I charge so much. And it was just like listing off their gear and how much it cost. And I'm like, that's not okay.
That's absurd.
Yeah. Nobody's hiring you because of, you have like $20,000 worth of camera equipment that you're bringing to your shoot. That's not why people are hiring you.
Well, going back to Art for a second, he's using his gear to tell you something about his attributes. And so that's what we want to be able to do. But moving along back to the bio, which is one of my favorite communication tools. So we have these fact-based bios that are frequently about your technical elements that you have, or your great post-production, or what a good producer you are. Other artists, I find, photographers, filmmakers, frequently have won awards, and so they use that as their bio. And I think that's good in terms of the credibility, but it makes the assigning person or the client work too hard, because they have to jump across what it means for you to, like, they're not going to understand what communication arts is, or the Graphies annual, or winning something in an ASMP
Right.
contest. They're not going to understand that. So that's one thing, is you have to put yourself in the client's shoes. So if we do a better job with our bio, which they're reading first before they really look at your pictures, because they're on your landing page and then they go to your about section, then we want to guide them in that. We want to make that easy for them. So I wanted to read for you a not good bio, if we have time for that.
Sure.
Award-winning editorial and advertising photographer brings his unique vision to all of his assignments. So unique is not a brand word. Working with hot lights, HMI, and strobe, coming from a film background, but working digitally. Do we care? In addition to versatile photographic skills, he can provide his clients a menu of additional services like casting and production, and has skills as DP director for motion with digital or film mediums for commercial. He often works for magazine editorials and advertising clients. This is one of the worst bios I've ever seen. So if you're out there in the audience and you have a bio like this, you should call me, because this is something that has to be fixed. Now, I'm going to read a great bio for you, and it's a short bio, because we all need a short bio and a long bio. This is Reuven Afanador's bio. So Reuven is an internationally renowned photographer of limitless imagination, powerful vision, and profound sense of self. His work is distinguished by an opulent classicism, nuanced by an irreverent point of view. His idiosyncratic visual language is informed by the fierce emotion and lavish style of his Latin American heritage, filtered by an exquisitely mannered elegance. I hope.
I think that so much.
See, it's rich and it's round and it's seductive. And then you see the images, and he's worked so closely with Pedro Almodovar. And so, that is quality. You understand the relationship between that filmmaker and this photographer. And then he also shoots for Oprah all the time. And what is he giving Oprah?
Opulent classicism.
A profound sense of self, a powerful vision, limitless imagination, and a reverent point of view. And he makes her feel beautiful.
Yeah.
Within this framework. So he is every year or two, he's doing another major personal project and publishing a book and having a show around that. I'm not saying that everyone in our audience is going to be like Reuven. What I'm trying to show you is how powerful the language is.
Oh, yeah.
Look at the difference between Mr. Hot Lights and Reuven, who has an opulent, idiosyncratic visual language.
Right.
Visual language. He's putting it right out there for you. So I love that. And then I thought I would share this interiors photographer who I've been working with one-on-one for a number of years. So it's not quite as sensual. He's a very great interiors person based here in Brooklyn. So with a deeply informed design vocabulary and ability to transport viewers into a life well lived, photographer-director David Land understands the myriad stories that there are to tell about the meaning of home. There are many versions of what constitutes an American upbringing, and David can lay claim to an interesting one. He was born in Northern California to a knowledgeable, discerning tribe that included a pilot, a botanist, painters, Asian art collectors, sailors, and raconteurs. These were people who loved beauty, entertaining, and travel, who created the world that David absorbed at a cellular level and brings alive in his scrumptious, multi-layered photographs and moving images.
Yeah.
It's so different from Reuven's and from Mr. Hot Lights. And it has a coolness that David's work has. And it tells you, it firmly helps you understand the DNA that he's made of. A botanist, a painter, a pilot. You understand that you're almost describing, someone who's related to Ernest Hemingway.
Yeah, but I also think it's just like there's something about the language, a deeply informed design vocabulary that just tells
an expert.
Yeah, but it just tells you what you're getting without just like, I'm going to lay this out here. And like, I think that there's a lot of, like we've discussed, and it just feels like it comes up over and over again. As visual people, we don't think necessarily with words, but there's a tendency to, even if you were trying to state this, I think for a lot of people who are trying to state that part of it in a bio, would try to list a bunch of things to like show, like, this is what I know, to show like there's look how much I know, and I've as
this
opposed
is where you need a writer.
Yeah.
You need a person who can write for you, unless you happen to be. I do have some people, more my fine art clients, who are very, very good writers because they're coming from a different place. They have to write proposals and funding, but they also have to meet with curators and try to get their work shown. But I wanted to talk about a little bit about the positioning here. Living in Brooklyn with his husband and two sons, David has truly expanded into an even broader world, having long been committed to showcasing the work of Black artists and designers. During this past year, this was a few years ago, David has used his beautiful multicultural home as a canvas, inviting the family into his artistic process and client work as the stars of films, design takeovers, and a daily diary. So we situated him in the real world. It's not theoretical. It is, the work is very much of the moment and was very much ahead of the curve. So then we needed to do the Instagram bio. And this is like a throwaway. People don't even think about how you're going to use that small amount of space that you have. So I said, NYC-based photographer, director of bold, chic, multi-layered interiors, portraits, lifestyle for major brands, retail, and editorial.
Yeah, I mean, you're
Bold, chic, and multi-layered. So
right.
there's the facts, the interiors, portrait, lifestyle, major brands. That is his marketplace, retail, and editorial. And who is he? Is a photographer, director of bold, chic, and multi-layered work. And this is really hard to get into that word count, but don't throw it away, audience, because many people are only paying attention to you on Instagram. And your little bio is up there the whole time that they're on your Instagram page.
Yep.
So this is a place where the channels are different but related. So I'm trying to show you how that works. One gives you a much bigger opportunity, and he has a very beautiful, kind of cool picture of himself on his site, which was much discussed between us. And I really love his bio. So now then we move on to things like physical promos, email blasts, and the voice of your everyday emails, which provide another avenue for brand language communications. And this can be hard for all of us because it's hard to get people to open your promos.
It's hard to get people to open emails.
Well, that's very difficult, but sometimes people prefer to DM rather than email. But keep in mind that after 3 emails on the same subject, that you have to call someone, but that means you have to be able to speak. So I understand that it's much harder to get people on the phone, which makes your writing language even more critical. You have to be able to communicate succinctly, clearly, and consistently. So once you understand what your attributes are and your capabilities, you're going to fold them into the language. So that's what we did with David. Okay. I thought that I worked on a project for an artist representative agency for 2 years where we did a monthly newsletter. And I thought this might be interesting because it's a very, very different voice. And it was a collection. We would do an assignment to our artists and we would ask them to go into their work or their new work on a theme that we would create on a monthly basis. So this one was when we were coming out of the pandemic, and it starts on the opening, what we would say is above the fold, like at the New York Times.
Yeah.
The beauty of nature. Let us be delighted. Then we would see 1 horizontal or 2 vertical images. And underneath that, we would have the text, for example, no matter where you live, work, or play, now is the perfect time to experience inspiration of the botanical variety. After 2 long years, it's truly on trend and almost necessary for our health to bring the outdoors in and the inside out. These are vital topics our artists have been exploring for quite some time. Join our reverie. And the title of this, is, let me tell you what it is, Floriography and Biophilia. And I found, and this is from the Latin for flowers and plants, and I found that the more obscure the title was, the more people opened the newsletter.
Huh.
So we had an incredible open rate on a consistent basis for the 2 years that we did this project.
It
about, never fell off.
I think there's I was like, initially you said that and I thought, I wonder where that is. And then I answered my own question. It's curiosity.
Exactly.
If you're, when I think about things that I actually do open up in my inbox, if there's whatever the case may be, like if the subject line gets me curious, if it's not from somebody I know, and I look at that, why am I going to open that? Like, unless it's if it's not from a client where I'm specifically looking at like, oh, this is for this date or the event on this date, whatever, blah, 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 very technical subject lines. It's the things that make me curious about what's inside. And that's also like, I think any good call, it's a call to action in a sense of, writing a subject line right there is that you're.
It's very difficult to do. I would never say that the subject line is easy. I when I'm writing a newsletter, I develop a very strong concept, and I work from the visuals out. I don't work from the language in. I work from the visuals. I figure out what can tell a big story. Then I write the body copy, and then I back into writing the name of the newsletter and the subject. That would be the subject line.
Mm.
So the subject line, there's a lot of mystique about the subject line. But if it just says news from Joe Smith Photography, unless I love Joe Smith's work, I'm going to be very, very unlikely to open that newsletter. And one compliment we got from a client who moved into a different part of the business, she wrote to my client and she said, would it be okay if you keep me on the newsletter list, even though I'm in a different position, because it makes me so happy and inspires me every month? What could make you happier than that?
Yeah.
That's a long-term relationship that you will have formed with a client, not just based on the newsletter, because the newsletter drove people really, really effectively to their very, very beautiful website. So everything was working in concert, and the logic and the organization of the website was very pleasurable. So that was another good experience. So we're going back to the word that I started with that you used a few times. What is the experience for the potential client and the existing client, and also for the client that you had and are trying to bring back into the fold?
Right.
Because those are your audiences. It's not one audience. It's not one level. So I'm showing you different ways that language can work in these tools, and it's always elevated. Like it's, you may be starting at 5 on the dial, but you need to turn it up to 8 or 9 from a language perspective. And that can be hard for visual people. So you need to be able to work with other people who you trust who can help you.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think there's always that sort of the sense of, and I think that for a lot of photographers, there's that the newsletter, the email newsletter is especially a difficult thing to kind of wrap their heads around, because there's a lot of it's just like, oh, this is what happened to me. This is what happened this month or whatever.
Right.
And I feel like I'm just going to like state things very clearly. I used to be a writer and journalist, and there's a bit of a technical aspect to it. I think that a lot of people think that that's what it has to be. And what you're saying, and what I think is also the more successful aspect of that, is when you put a sense of mystery in there, and you're like, oh, like I'm not telling you everything. I want to lead you out of this email. The whole point is to like set the table, and I want you to come to. I'm showing you the table setting, and then I want you to come to the meal and eat. That's what the next call to action out of that newsletter is to bring you to the website about an event that's going on, or whatever is,
Or
the
to
show you're doing, or
or to Facebook. It can lead you to all of those things. How many times I see people who are not putting their social media links in their promotion. And I just think that is madness. Because going back to what I said in the beginning, this is what was traditionally called integrated marketing and communications. And so there was a person who would be doing this job in an agency or a direct mail place or whatever that may be. And if you're working on your own, I understand that it feels hard to manage all of these tools. So that's why I suggest the first place that you start is getting your elevator pitch right. So you're not saying, I'm a still life photographer. You're saying my work is streamlined. It's very romantic. I'm really interested in what people's relationships are like with each other. And I'm really interested in how to use bold color to tell that story. Now, that might be very interesting because you're giving a factual thing, right, about bold color, about that story, if that's something that you're really committed to. Like there's a very well-known food photographer, and all of her work is based on a very intense color scale. Like you would never see her doing something that where the color looks real. And she's been extremely successful. And that's one of the hallmarks of her work. But it's wrapped into other kinds of storytelling. You know, maybe she's telling the story all about, the new fad for different kind of flavored martinis. Maybe that's the topic. And then there's the implication of people in the room, maybe who aren't there. And then there's the product itself. And then there's why she's choosing a certain kind of color palette to tell the story. Because maybe what she does love is a very retro color palette. So if she's referencing, a cocktail cart with cocktails and Manhattans and stuff, that makes sense. It's a very integrated way of looking at it. And then I'm talking about the visuals, but if she's promoting her work, she can address that through the work.
Right.
You can address that through the language and marry the language. So if she were to describe her work, she would not just say, I'm a food photographer.
Right.
She'd say, my work, I'm very interested and knowledgeable about the food world. And my work is extremely bold and colorful and very referenced in mid-century design, whatever. But You're starting to get a picture. And so
your brain starts to form the photos before you see them, and like informing your sensibility as to what you're going to experience when you see this. Because, like, let's be honest, people who are going to hire you are going to spend, like, aren't going to go through every portfolio. Like, I had someone who contacted me recently who had found me through a Google search, and they're like, I didn't go to every page, because when you think about it, you look at the things that are show up on the searches, you get a little snippet of information, and they went like, oh, we clicked on you. You weren't the top ranking page, but it was that, what they read about a particular topic in that snippet, and what they had seen was like, that's what matters to us. Well, those are the things that, those values, those brand values that I was putting out there, that they read in that little, summary on their Google search, were like, oh.
Thank you for putting the word Google search in there, because I was going to say that. Don't waste that opportunity. Like David, who doesn't have that on his Google page, it just says photographer director based in NYC. What he should have on there is, I don't know how many words you're allowed to have in your Google search, but he should have his Instagram bio. That's a way to use your Instagram bio, because it's like a very small amount of words, which I can't remember now, if it's 50 words or something like that.
It's in the meta description of the page, and it depends on what it is. And like that, yes, if you can try to get as much of that as you can into his maybe about page, that would make sense. But for different pages, it has different things. And this is a specific topic that they were looking for, which I have a page that addresses that topic. And my description, like, that was what stood out to them. So yeah, it's the language. Like, people don't necessarily think like that people are going to see that, even if they're doing a Google search. All they're seeing is the words that show up. And unless they go into like an image search, most of the time they're just getting a list of different websites with a little bit of text underneath it, and go like, oh, what's going to stand out to them? It's that text.
This is a good place to put your technical chops to work. Because it's a missed opportunity for many people. And I'm not, a technical person. I can say it should look and feel like this. And, I'm a brand person. I'm like, what does it mean? And then I would have someone come in and do that meta work for me. But photographers, I'm sure, would be very good at, using that opportunity. And I think that that's great. So I'm going to say that again.
Okay.
I'd like to talk for a moment about treatments, because this is becoming more and more prevalent in every part of the industry. It initially came into the industry in the advertising world, because advertising agencies have to do, very full-on treatments in order to pitch to a client, whether it's a new client or pitching a campaign or it's something for an existing client. Now, treatments are everywhere. I would say that more and more I am asked to read treatments that my clients are doing for a variety of kinds of projects. So the one that I mentioned to you here was for a really wonderful lifestyle photographer she's and she wrote all of this. She worked with someone to write this treatment. When thinking about Walgreens, what comes foremost to mind is their mission to strongly celebrate the diversity of life. Their CEO says diversity is less about how we work than what unique experience we have had and what talents and ideas each of us are willing to invest in achieving success together. So this was for a library shoot. And she said the goal of this library shoot is to convey this celebration of diversity by showing the importance of relationships, family, love, vitality, healthy lifestyle choices, and an authentic joy of life. And then she says how she's going to do it. My focus will be to encourage moments that feel unrehearsed and candid in an effort to document and observe a family engaging in their daily activities, blah, 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 blah. But
Right.
Here's one of her pictures, and it feels like what she's describing. There's no, it was a perfect job for her because the client was expressing something that has been in her work for the past 20 years. So it made sense. So this is where your ability to communicate your brand and understand what your brand attributes are, and either talk about them with a writer or write it yourself or write it with your studio manager, is really critical in winning bigger jobs. This is not something that you're going to do for an editorial project, but this might be something for brand direct or something where you're doing a library of images, or it could be for advertising, or it could be for someone who wants you to shoot a wonderful wedding and they want to understand really what your intention is so they
Right.
understand the stories that you're going to tell. So this is another way where if you understand the front end distilled pieces of your attributes and capabilities and you write your elevator slogan, you can build on that. And then you write your bio, and then you have your Instagram bio, for example, and then you've built a newsletter or, some kind of email blast that you're doing. You build on the tools. You don't have to invent them every time. And
Right. You're interweaving everything, like whereas you might use similar threads in different platforms or ways, but they're all coming together to form the tapestry of your brand
of your
attributes.
communications. So one thing I would say in my own business is right there on my homepage. It says at Mercury Lab, we are in the business of transformation. So I'm telling you the whole story. The transformation is what interests me at a very fundamental level, but we're interested in your business. It's not because we're just doing spiritual work together or we're doing some kind of phototherapy together. We're doing something much bigger because what we're doing is very real world focused, but it's all about getting to a new place. We're not doing something about where we were before. So I'm not going to say that was easy to write. It took me a long time of writing it and rewriting it. And you have to respect that process. Put yourself in a place where you're not sitting in the living room with ESPN on the background. You're not going to be able to write. Writing, you have to put yourself in a bubble in order to write well.
I think that I think back to this John Cleese speech that he gave once. It was about being creative and how to figure out how to be creative. And it is like you have to set aside the time to be creative and not have something else interfering. And I think it's the same way with writing. You have to set aside the time to do the writing where there's not a bunch of other distractions, and you can't expect that it's going to be perfect the first time around.
That's right.
You have to it's a process of going back to over and over again and editing it and looking at it and going, okay, does this really accomplish what I want to accomplish? Does it communicate the things that we're trying to get across to readers, viewers, whomever? Otherwise, it's a waste of time in a lot of ways. It's not. That's a poor phrase for me to use. If you're not communicating the things that you want to get across to clients and whomever is reading, then you're wasting their time. They're just going to read that if it's purely a technical exercise, like the examples you brought up before, somebody listing like this is the equipment that I use and blah blah blah. They're going to look at that and they're just going to be like, this doesn't. What am I? I'm not learning anything from this, and so I'm just going to move on to the next person. As opposed to something like the examples that you brought up, where there are these deeply engaging word choices and things that are evocative and make me think like, okay, I want to know more. Again, same thing we were talking about, like the the subject line for the newsletter, things that get you to want to learn more. The mystery, there's evocation in the language that makes you think, okay, I want to see what these photos are like. When you were saying like, okay, this is like a opulent classicism, like I have an immediate picture in my head, but then I'm like, but does it match up to what they do? Because now I'm curious. I want to see what their work looks like.
With these images and see what they mean.
Right.
I want to say, just to kind of put a little frame around this, is that if I'm writing a bio for someone, that might take me somewhere between 4 to 6 hours. I'm not suggesting that it's a fast process,
right.
And I don't write it all at once. I write the first part of it. That usually takes, I start with an interview. I interview the subject of the bio. Then I go back and I extract some language from there or something that I understand about them. Then I do my first draft, which usually takes me 2 hours. So I'm already 3 hours in. Then I build the next part of the bio after that. So all told, I would say it takes me 6 hours from interviewing with someone to delivering the bio. And generally speaking, my clients are very happy. And it's not just that they're photographers, they're all kinds of people. And that a lot of times I'm working with people who I've done their branding work, their meaning work, but sometimes I'm working for people who I barely know. But because I start with an interview, I'm flushing a lot of information to the surface about them. And I'm very pointed about what kind of questions that I ask. So if you're working with someone like me, that's what the process is going to be like. But if you're doing it yourself, you still have to ask yourself those questions.
Right.
Like I wanted to talk for a moment about this artist, where we did this incredible zine for him. We did everything. We redid all of the editing on his site. We reorganized the work. We found another way of talking about his personal work and how it was in alignment with the celebrity and portraiture work that he was doing. And in the zine, he's a very cool guy. He's very cerebral and quirky and funny. And, part of his bio, he talks about how he makes his kids laugh out loud. So there's a deconstructed aspect to the visuals where we're saying, like he's talking about a celebrity and he's saying so-and-so greeting his friends as usual, but it's showgirls from the Rockettes. There's nothing common about it. Or we did all these little drawings for him. We did icons for him. One which is a hand-drawn arrow, little known fact. For About, we did a line drawing of him, where we traveled to places where he has shot or, taking his subjects on location, what music he played, what's the soundtrack, and then behind the scenes. Now, I have to say, this is a really great scene. We printed it on newsprint, and the language enhances. The language of the icons is very curious, and you understand that there's a library of icons. And then in addition, here he's shooting, a film director who's in a bespoke little, like skinny, like Paul Smith kind of suit. And he says, we threw down a little James Brown on the boombox, get funky. But I had him start to write it, and then I rewrote it. So we dialed it up. It was a collaborative effort between us. So you see what I'm saying? This has nothing to do with the biophilia
Right.
newsletter, and this
But it's also,
was
there's a curiosity here, like looking at the folks who are listening. There are all these lovely little hand drawings here of little icons, but they make me curious as to what's next. Like it gives me the visual language which is being used is it's quirky, I guess would be the word that I would necessarily like immediately.
cool. It's very much of the moment. This particular artist, you would never realize to look at him. He seems very introverted, but what comes out of his mouth is so riotously personal and the kind of thing that would make you fall off your seat because it's so cool and so funny. And I mean, I feel that when we became so kind of everything, websites for photographers used to be much more interesting and for brands, and then things got very flat. And then when we got to the pandemic and we couldn't send anything to people, we weren't doing any direct mail, and direct mail is an incredible opportunity. And I find very interestingly is that direct mail is used much more heavily in the UK than it is in the US. There's still a real tradition of people opening their mail. And I will say that when I receive something in the mail, when someone takes the trouble to finding me and sending something to me now, I look at it, I engage with it. So I do think as time evolves now, because people are going back to the office part-time, we should be able to send things. And so that's an opportunity that I don't want the audience to waste. If you can find people and find an address for them, do an integrated project. But remember to build in the order that we've been talking about in terms of building your language and there being a logic and meaning and emotional relationship between the call to action about the language you use to yourself and then the language that you use when you're doing the actual embedding it in the work. Right. And then because it also is the call to action for all your visuals. It's not just the call to action for your language. It's the call to action for everything. You have to embed those brand attributes into everything. And part of what you also are doing is thinking about the audience. I said this earlier. It's the audience you have, the audience you used to have, and the audience that you want.
Well, I think that's one of the things that you have to also think about, like social media. A lot of people are like, well, how do I, like, I'm trying to get new followers or new clients through using social media. Well, you have to think about that language that is also based on like that you're using, especially Instagram, your captions. Like you have to be engaging your past followers or clients, whatever, people who've been there, because a lot of times I think photographers, they have a large portion of people who are in their followership, or, depends on how big your followership is, are, at least when you're starting out, are those people who have already hired you or agreed to work with you in some way or know you. So you're talking to them as well as to new people and how they're who are coming into it. So like you're saying, you're reaffirming the brand. It's not just to new, potential like people are coming in. It's to the people who are already there so that they can stay engaged with it.
That's
and
right.
therefore interact with it, which is going to help it reach new people.
And the third part of that is the people who are no longer your clients. So
right.
We don't want to forget about those people. We need to understand why we lost them. And so you don't always know that. But when I'm working with an artist, let's say, and I'm working on a book project with a client who's been with me for 10 years. Now, when I'm working on that edit, I'm thinking about the audience she has now, the audience she used to have that we want to get back, and the audience that she would like to have. And the edit is an opportunity for you. You have to be running on all three levels at the same time. So remember that, because that involves your attributes, but maybe that's where the aspirational attribute comes in, because that's the attribute that is the jet fuel for you moving forward. So it's all integrated. I guess that's the ultimate theme for today. It's all integrated. We're talking about the power of language, but we're not divorcing it from who you are as a visual
Artist,
practitioner, visual artist.
And
so
this can seem, I think that's a good place to kind of wrap things up. But it's all of these things that are sort of like that are coming together, and they're related, and we interweave them. And it can seem like, I think, an overwhelming process at times for people who are not necessarily writers or feel that they're
not language people.
Right. So you may need to work with someone else to help define this and create your brand messaging and think about the various ways that that's going to come out over your different platforms. And there are people out there that just, Beth, you do it. Like, this is, what you do. If people are looking for someone who can help them with this, they can reach out to you. Where can they reach you?
Sure. Beth, BETH at Mercury Lab. That's MERCURYLAB.com. And I'd love to hear from you because I'm interested in working with people from every sector of the business. That's the wonderful thing about branding, is that you use the same. I could be working with your client, and I could be working with you, and I could be working with someone else in a completely different sector. So I just want to remind you all that you have a group of attributes and that you have to communicate more than one attribute visually and through language. You can't focus just on one attribute. It's not dimensional. And once you're clear about your attributes, I want you to use them in everything that you shoot, communicate visually, and speak and write about. So you want your brand to be clear no matter what you're creating and no matter what sector you may be in. So it's about the spirit of your work, no matter what the category is. And I know that if you work your brand consciously and steadily, you will feel and find that things change over time. You'll become much more self-assured in the work that you do. Your work will become richer and deeper. People come to me because they want to get into new parts of the business, or they've been very successful in the commercial world and they want to stretch into the fine art world. There's many, many reasons why you want to work on a deeper level in your business, and we work on all of them. But I don't want to say that we won't just work on the language piece with you if that's what you need to do at this time. But inevitably, the deeper we go, the more precise your brand expression is going to be, going back to our opulent classicism or our Ernest Hemingway bold interiors photographer and filmmaker. And I will say a wonderful thing that happened with him, just in closing, is that he wasn't directing at all when we first started. And he ended up creating and directing a beautiful little film that won a beautiful award for filmmaking a year later. So he was working as a filmmaker just for a year. So this is what we want. And then that gave him the courage to go deeper and deeper and use his brand attributes. If you were to look at his website, you would see that even how we named the navigation is based in these very mysterious words. It's an engagement. It's fun. It's sexy. I'm using that word, but in a way that you understand what I mean.
Yeah, it's the thing that it's enticing, and it's seductive in a way. Like, it's bringing you in. I think that, for me, in my experience in doing this on my own brand over the years, and I'm probably it's probably time to do another look at things and overhaul and think about it again. It has been some of the more rewarding work of my business to explore those things. And, what is it truly about? What are the things that sort of, what are the attributes that define my work? Because otherwise, sometimes I think you can kind of like just sort of float through life and not really understand, like, I'm just doing the thing, as opposed to being, what is the word I'm trying to think of? There's intentional is the
I
word I'm
think you're
thinking of.
bringing up a really good point because things are not immutable. And so we do the definition work and then we create the tools and then we have to give the tools time to work. And then we work the attributes very consciously and what we're conceiving and what the work is about and how we're running the business and so on. And then if you really work that process very consciously, inevitably, another attribute rises to the surface. I've seen it happen so many times because I have many clients that I've worked with on and off for, at least 10 years. And so that's part of the pleasure of working like this. Exactly what you're saying is that you get to become yourself more fully. And in doing that, you have a much greater satisfaction and ability to succeed because you're using all the tools at your disposal. And that's what you want to do because you don't want to just sit back and phone it in. I mean, I've come across people who do that, but they're not very happy. I want you to feel a sense of satisfaction and pride and pleasure in where you are and where you can go. And that, for me, is part of the wonderful aspect of doing this kind of work with people. I want everyone to do well.
Well, hey, photographers, have you noticed how the life goes out of your subject's eyes when you tell them how to pose? You say, stand there, put your arm like this. It gets even worse when you have subjects who are a bit shy or introverted. If you want to create authentic, emotional photos, my Let's Be Real unposed photography prompts will help you create interactions that your clients will remember when they look back on their photos for years. I've developed my unposed photography prompts over 20 years, taking pictures of people using my own self-conscious nature to help my clients who felt that they were unphotogenic. From couple sessions to weddings and family portraits, these prompts will help you get more dynamic and natural photos with your subjects. And right now, you can get 25% off if you use the code POD25P. That's POD, P-O-D, 25P, all uppercase. Just go to nerdyphotographer.com and find the prompts in our store. Stop posing and start prompting.
Hey, and now for my favorite part of the show. What's that say? Useless information. This is always death.
Beth, did you know that bubble wrap was initially intended to be wallpaper?
Was it meant to be kind of a sound?
I think it was, I'm guessing it's texturally some sort of that there was some sort of, or maybe, who knows, soundproofing of some kind.
And was it actually used like that? Like, have you seen photographs of people who have done that?
I have not. This is just a little piece of trivia.
We'd be pulling all that plastic down there. We don't want that.
No, not at all. Beth, thank you very much for coming on. We'll have to have you back again sometime.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure. And please feel free to reach out to me. And I wish you all the very, very best in your work and the pleasure and focus that you take in it. And it's been really great to be here with you again. It's, as usual, a wonderful conversation.
Welcome back. I hope you all enjoyed my discussion with Beth Taubner. Many thanks to Beth for coming back and being on the show again. If you'd like to contact her directly to get help with your photo business marketing, you can find her contact information in the episode notes. And also be sure to follow along with the Nerdy Photographer on social media. You can find us on TikTok, Instagram, Threads, and X, formerly known as Twitter, at the handle @TheNerdyPhoto. That's @TheNerdyPhoto on all of those different social media platforms. And I would also like to add that my plan to go through the wormhole worked perfectly.
The back half of the ship is in a pocket dimension.
But you're assuming that wasn't part of the plan. Until next time, everybody, stay safe and stay nerdy.
Who's that coming back to town? You better start listening. Who's your heart been beating about? You better You better listen.